Well, good evening, everyone. What I'm hoping to do on this stream is read out the full Brexit Chequers plan. I was going to do it in a video and edit it down, but then I kind of realised that it's going to be a massively long video to edit down. So instead I thought I'd do it in a live stream. That way you guys can join in, debate as I bring up various points. And here is the full Brexit Chequers plan. Hopefully people start joining in with this. Again, my streams generally don't get a lot of people joining, so I've got the chat live on my phone. So if you do want to chat, you do want to join in and have a look at what I'm seeing and have your opinion, then I'll be reading them out throughout the course of the stream. So, the Chequers white paper that Theresa May released was called The Future Relationship Between the United Kingdom and the European Union. Got 98 pages of this to read out, but hopefully I'm going to try and skim through the more boring bits, just to keep you guys interested. So, in the foreword, she writes, in the referendum on the 23rd of June 2016, the largest ever democratic exercise in the United Kingdom, the British people voted to leave the European Union. And that is what we will do, leaving the single market, the customs union, ending free movement and the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in this country, leaving the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy, and ending the days of sending vast sums of money to the EU every year. We will take back control of our money, laws and borders and begin a new exciting chapter in our nation's history. It now falls to us all to write that chapter. That is why over the last 2 years I have travelled up and down the country listening to views from all 4 nations. In other words, Scotland and Northern Ireland, out of the nations of the United Kingdom and every single side of the debate. One thing has always been clear, that there is more that binds this great country than divides it. Using the Joe Cox line, we share an ambition for our country to be fairer and more prosperous than ever before. We are an outward-facing trading nation. We have dynamic, innovative economy, and we live by common values of openness, the rule of law, and tolerance of others. Leaving the EU gives us the opportunity to deliver on that ambition once and for all, strengthening our economy, our communities, our union, our democracy, and our place in the world, while maintaining a close friendship and strong partnership with our European neighbours. But to do so requires pragmatism and compromise from both sides. At the very start of our negotiations, the government set out the principles which would guide our approach, and the EU set out theirs. Some of those principles, as you would expect, were in tension. Some of the proposals each side advanced were not acceptable to the other. That is inevitable in negotiation. So we are now evolved our proposals while sticking to our principles. The proposal set out in this white paper finds a way through, which respects both our principles and the EU's. This was the spirit in which my cabinet agreed a way forward at Chequers. It is the spirit in which my government has approached this white paper, and it is the spirit in which I now expect the EU to engage in the next phase of the negotiations. Our proposal is comprehensive, it is ambitious, and it strikes the balance. It doesn't, because you've got 2 cabinet members resigning this week, but it strikes the balance we need between rights and obligations. I would ensure that we leave the EU without leaving Europe. It would return accountability over the laws we live to London, Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast, and end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice in the UK. It would have preserved the UK's and the EU's frictionless access to each other's markets for goods, protection, jobs and livelihoods on both sides, and proposed new arrangements for services. It would meet our shared commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland through the overall future relationship in a way that respects the EU's autonomy without harming the UK's constitutional and economic integrity, at the end of free movement, taking back control of the UK's border, blah, 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 blah. It would see the UK step into the world. It's basically all a speech. I'll skip through this because it's useless. I'll go to the main plan because most of that's just rubbish anyway. Okay. So let's start with this. Executive summary. So the United Kingdom will leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. That's already been agreed. That's 2 years after Article 50 was begun. And begin to chart a new course in the world. The government will have delivered on the result of the 2016 referendum, the biggest democratic exercise in this country's history. And it will have reached a key milestone in its principles' mission to build a country that works for everyone, a country that is stronger, fairer, more united, and more outward-looking. To fulfill that mission, the government is advancing a detailed proposal for a principled and practical Brexit. This proposal underpins the vision set out by the Prime Minister at Lancaster House in Florence and Mansion House in Nottingham, and in doing so, addresses questions raised by the EU in intervening months, explaining how the relationship would work, what benefits it would deliver for both sides, and why it would respect the sovereignty of the UK as well as the autonomy of the EU. So, a principled Brexit. A principled Brexit means respecting the result of the referendum, which David Davis and Boris Johnson obviously felt that they didn't do this. On the decision of the UK public to take back control of the UK's laws, borders and money, and doing so in a way that supports the government's wider objectives across 5 key areas of the UK's national life. For the economy, developing a broad and deep economic relationship with the EU that maximises future prosperity in line with modern industrial strategy and minimises disruption from trade to the UK and the EU, protecting jobs and livelihoods, at the same time making the most of trading opportunities around the world. And for communities, addressing specific concerns voiced in the referendum by ending free movement and putting in place a new immigration system, introducing new independent policies to support farming and fishing communities, and using the Shared Prosperity Fund to spark a new wave of regeneration in the UK's towns and cities, keeping citizens safe, for the Union meeting commitments to Northern Ireland by protecting the peace and processes and avoiding a hard border, safeguarding the constitutional and economic integrity of the UK, and devolving the appropriate powers to Edinburgh, Cardiff and Belfast while ensuring the deal delivers for the Crown dependencies, Gibraltar and the other overseas territories. Noting there will be no change in the UK long-standing relationships with the EU. There will be no change in their long-standing relationships with the UK. For democracy, leaving the EU's institutions. For the UK's place in Euro, continuing to promote and invent new ideas. And it goes on to basically give a summary of the plan itself. But let's go into the law bit, because it's very hard to pick out detail from that introduction. Okay, so following the decision of the people of the UK in the referendum, the UK is leaving the EU and as a result will leave the single market and the customs union. She said that before, seizing new opportunities and forging a new role in the world. At the same time, the UK wants to protect jobs and support growth through a new economic partnership with its nearest neighbours. This proposal respects the UK's sovereignty, building in a clear role for Parliament, and preserves the constitutional and economic integrity of the UK's own union. Yes, but the whole Brexit idea has been questioned in Scotland. So, a deep and comprehensive economic partnership between the UK and the EU would have distinct benefits for both sides. The UK is the world's 5th largest economy The EU is the UK's biggest market. The UK proposal set out in this chapter reflects the unique ties that exist between the UK and the EU economies. A serious offer, which the government believes would benefit the UK and its close partners in the EU. In formulating this offer, the government has listened carefully to the positions that the EU has set out. The proposal respects the EU autonomy and the integrity of the single market. At the core of the UK's proposal is the establishment by the UK and the EU of a free trade area. This is the bit that caused contention with David Davis and Boris Johnson. A free trade area for goods. So basically she's allowing goods to come in tariff-free. This would avoid friction at the border and ensure that both sides meet their commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland through the overall future relationship. So by using this whole Northern Ireland line argument, she's vouching for this free trade area, but obviously that was the whole reason why Boris Johnson and David Davis left, was because of this free trade area. It would protect the uniquely integrated supply chains and just-in-time processes that have developed across the UK and the EU over the last 40 years, and will remain important given our geographical proximities. These close arrangements on goods will sit alongside new arrangements for services and digital, recognising that the UK and the EU will not have current levels of access to each other's markets in the future. Every trading relationship has varying levels of market access. Is anyone watching? And at the same time, the UK recognises that the single market is built on a balance of rights and obligations, and that the UK cannot have all the benefits of membership of the single market without its obligations. The UK's proposal therefore establishes a new framework that holds the rights of regulation, blah blah blah. The UK's proposal for the economic partnership would establish a new free trade area and maintain a common rule book for goods, including agri-food, covering only those rules necessary to provide for frictionless trade at the border. The common rule book will be legislated for in the UK by the UK Parliament and the developed legislators, as set out in detail in Chapter 4. Include new arrangements on services and investments, provide regulatory flexibility, end free movement, giving the UK back control over how many people to come into the UK, and include a new framework that respects the UK's control of its border, enabling UK EU citizens to continue to travel to each other's countries and business and professionals to provide business services. So she's allowing EU citizens to, so in this point here, she's saying ending free movement of people. But in this point here, she's saying that businesses can still employ EU citizens. So that's not. She's basically saying you can't go on holiday for free, but they can come and take your job. And to help students and young people to enjoy the opportunities and experiences available in the UK and the EU in line with the arrangements that the UK might want to offer to other close trading partners in the future, including new arrangements on digital trade, including e-commerce, which enable the UK and the EU to respond nimbly to the new opportunities and challenges presented by emerging technologies, recognising that the UK and the EU will not have current levels of access to each other's markets. Incorporate binding provisions related to open and fair competition, provide for socio-economic cooperation in areas including energy, transport, civil, judicial cooperation, so we're basically having similar laws. Be consistent with the UK's ambitions as a global trading policy with its own independent trade policy, able to represent itself at the World Trade Organization, to make credible and balanced offers to a third country trading partners, and to implement a trade remedies and sanctions regime. So she wants this independent trade policy, but she also wants to get this deal with the EU, and the EU is going to say, well, you can't have it, but you can't have the best of both worlds. The UK will be seeking specific arrangements for the Crown dependencies, Gibraltar, and other overseas territories. Goods. The UK and the EU have deeply integrated goods markets covering manufactured, agricultural, food and fisheries products. The UK is an important market for the EU. The UK reporting an overall trade deficit in goods, the EU of 95 billion. In the same year, the EU accounted for 7% of the UK. While there has been a trend towards opening up of service markets, existing trading relationships involve greater liberalisation on goods than on services. So she's letting goods come in freely, but not services. For example, I don't know, cleaning and stuff. The UK proposes the establishment of a free trade area for goods, including agri-food. This would avoid friction at the border, protect jobs and livelihoods, and ensure that the UK and the EU meet their commitments to Northern Ireland and Ireland through the overall future relationship. The UK and the EU would maintain a common rule book. So the UK's proposal for free trade area includes the phrased introduction of a new facilitated customs arrangement. It's basically the customs union in a different title. The elimination of tariffs, again, the single market in a different title. A common rule book for manufactured goods, again, different title. A common rule book for agriculture, food and fisheries, and robust domestic market surveillance. Upon its withdrawal from the EU, the UK will leave the customs union, right? But the UK has been clear that it is seeking a new customs arrangement that provides the most frictionless trade possible in goods between the UK and the EU, while allowing the UK to forge new trade relationships with partners around the world. The arrangement must allow the EU to protect the integrity of its single market and customs union. So, she's going to make a new deal, and she's trying to say to the EU, oh, it's not going to threaten your existing single market and customs union. The UK's proposal is to agree on a new FCA with the EU, as if, I don't know what that is, mirroring the EU's customs approach, that is, external border would ensure that goods entering the EU via the UK have complied with EU customs processes and the correct EU duties have been paid. So that's for anything going between here and through Ireland from the sea, basically. This will mean where a good reaches the UK border and the destination can be robustly demonstrated by a trusted trader. The UK recognises that this approach would need to be consistent with the integrity of the EU's customs union, and the EU would need to be confident that goods cannot enter its customs territory without the correct tariff trade policy being applied. The UK therefore proposes a large range of areas for discussion with the EU. The UK and the EU should agree a mechanism for the remittance of relevant tariff revenue. The UK and the EU should agree on a new trusted trader scheme. The UK and the EU should agree circumstances in which repayments can be granted. This is all to do in the negotiations. The UK would remain a common rule book with the EU, including the Union's customs code. There will need to be an appropriate mechanism to ensure that the new declarations and order checks between the UK and the EU do not to be introduce tax and exercise purposes. The UK is seeking to be at the cutting edge of global customs policy. Let's see. So tariffs, a necessary underpinning of the UK-EU free trade area, in addition to the FCA, would be an agreement not to impose tariffs, quotas, or routine requirements for rules, which is the whole point of having a deal. I understand this. to ensure the trade in goods between the UK and the EU remains frictionless at the border. The UK proposes zero tariffs across goods, no routine requirements for rules of origin, and arrangements that facilitate accumulation with current and future free trade agreements. The UK and the EU are both home to strong manufacturing sectors, such as cars and stuff, and the production of manufactured goods rarely takes place in one location. So with modern manufacturing seeing increasingly specialised firms with complex supply chains that stretch across multiple countries and operate on a just-in-time basis, both the UK and the EU will want to ensure that European manufacturing continues to thrive in an increasingly competitive global market. So that's what the car manufacturers have basically told her that she's put in. A common rule book for manufactured goods is in the UK's interest, and basically goes on to explain it. The UK has long advocated a convergence of rules and standards for goods, whether as a member of the EU or on the global stage. In the context of a common rule book, the UK believes that manufacturers should only need to undergo one series of tests in either market in order to place products in both markets. In order to achieve this, the UK's proposal would cover all of the compliance activity necessary for products to be sold in the UK and EU markets. Okay. There is extensive trade between the UK and the EU in agriculture. Under the existing constitutional settlements in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, each devolved administrations and legislative generally has competence to make its own. Who's winning the tennis? Both even at the moment. The UK government will work closely with the devolved administrations who share high ambitions. There are three broad categories of rules that apply to agriculture, food and fisheries. I'll skip through this because I'm really not interested in this. So let's go. Services and investment. The UK is world leading in many service sectors. The UK is proposing new arrangements for services and digital that will provide regulatory flexibility. And the UK's proposal builds on the principles of international trade and the precedents of existing EU trade arrangements and reflects its unique starting point. The WTO's General Arrangement on Trade and Services provides a framework for all of it. And the UK proposes arrangements with broad coverage, ensuring that service suppliers and investors are allowed to operate in a broad number of sectors without encountering justified barriers or discrimination unless otherwise agreed. In other words, it's going to look like we're in the EU anyway, even though we're leaving. So it's really Brexit in name only. The EU regime for the recognition of professionals' qualifications, it's about qualifications, professional and business services, I'll skip that, financial services. The UK and the EU financial services markets are highly interconnected. UK located banks underwrite about half of the debate and equity issued by EU businesses. Let's go through that, it's not interesting. I want to get on to a bit about EU citizens are integral to communities across the UK. With 3.5 million EU citizens living in the UK, approximately 800,000 UK nationals play an equally important role in communities across the EU. So the UK and the EU have already reached an agreement on citizens' rights, which provides EU citizens living in the UK and UK nationals living in the EU before the end of the implementation period with certainty about their rights going forward. Individuals will continue to be able to move, live and work on the same basis as now up until the end of December 2020. ending free movement of people. In future, hold on, let me take a drink. In future, it will be for the UK government and Parliament to determine the domestic immigration rules that will apply. Free movement of people will end as the UK leaves the EU. The immigration bill will bring EU migration laws, enabling the UK to set out its future immigration system in domestic legislation. The UK will design a system that works for all parts of the UK. The Migration Advisory Committee report due in September will provide important evidence on patterns of EU migration, the role of migration in the wider economy to inform us. Further details of the UK's future immigration system will be set out in due course. The UK will continue to be an open and tolerant nation and will want to continue to attract the brightest and best from the EU and elsewhere. The UK's future immigration arrangements will set out how those from the EU and elsewhere can apply to come and work with the UK. This will be crucial to supporting its public services. So, they've yet to make immigration arrangements about EU citizens, as well as enhancing the UK's attractiveness for research, development, and innovations. But she's going to try and clamp down on it in the negotiations, but the thing is, the EU's not going to be able to allow access to things like the single market and customs union if, particularly a low tariff on goods, if, you can't have. I think that's why she's done the goods rather than the services, because if you had the services, you've got to allow free movement of people. But then it's complicated. Any future mobility arrangements will be consistent with the ending of free movement, respecting the UK's control of its borders and the government's objective to control and reduce net migration. Trading arrangements which cover trade in services include provisions on the mobility of people for the provisions of services, known as Mode 4 commitments. Given the depth of the relationship and close ties between the peoples of the UK and the EU, the UK will make a sovereign choice in a defined number of areas to seek reciprocal mobility arrangements with the EU, building on current WTO JATS commitments, blah, 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 blah. So, allow citizens to travel freely without a visa for tourism and temporary business activity, so you can go to the EU freely. Facilitate mobility for students and young people, are as streamlined as possible, provide for further defined mobility provisions, including arrangements to ensure that UK citizens living in the EU in the future can continue from benefits from pension entitlements and associated healthcare. These proposals are without prejudice to the common travel area arrangements between the UK and Ireland and the Crown dependencies. So there's going to be a free border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. The principle of non-discrimination between existing member states should apply to all of the provisions agreed as part of the framework for mobility. So in other words, she's going to apply immigration law to the whole of the EU as opposed to specific countries of the EU. And then it goes on. Let's. Let's see what would be the next interesting bit. State aid. The UK has long been a proponent of a rigorous state aid system. This is good for taxpayers and consumers and ensures an efficient allocation of resources. The UK has an excellent record on compliance and has been among the lowest grantors of state aid as a proportion of gross domestic product. So the government has made clear that its commitment to continuing the control of anti-competitive subsidies by creating a UK-wide subsidy and training program To support the depth and breadth of the future EU economic partnership, the UK would propose to incorporate its domestic choice to maintain a robust state aid regime in its future economic relationship with the EU. In light of this, the UK would make an upfront commitment to maintain a common rulebook with the EU on state aid. Enforcing the CMA, this is without prejudice to the UK's intention to develop new tailored arrangements in relation to payments to farmers and other land managers for environmental benefits, and the UK's future public procedure policy. The UK's proposal for its future economic partnership with the EU would not fetter its sovereign discretion on tax, including to set direct or indirect tax rates and to set its own minimum tax rate. So it sounds like she's going to still be giving money to the EU if it agrees that it should. So it's basically saying, to get our deal, we're going to give you a bit of money. The UK's proposal for its future economic partnership with the EU... Oh, I've read that. Let's see. Competition, environment, climate change, social... The UK firmly believes in the importance of strong labour protections while also embracing the opportunities arising from the changing world of work. Existing workers' rights enjoyed under EU law will continue to be available in the UK law the day of withdrawal. Fair enough. But the UK already exceeds EU minimum standards in a number of areas such as paternal leave and flexible working arrangements, and is a leader in many others. Given this strong record and the context of the UK's vision for the future relationship with the EU, the UK proposes that the UK and the EU commit to non-regression of labour standards. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Consumer protection as well. Aviation. The UK has the largest aviation industry in Europe, and the UK's geographical position in the network is key, with around 80% of all North Atlantic traffic passing through the UK in Irish control space. So they're going to keep the free air area, and the same roads. As you can probably tell now, I'm skipping through a lot of this because it's civil judicial cooperation. Civil judicial cooperation is mutually beneficial to both the UK and the EU, so we're going to keep similar judicial laws. Businesses benefit from legal certainty in the event of disputes and are more confident trading across borders. Consumers and employers benefit from protections for weaker parties. The EU has already shown that a deeper level of civil judicial cooperation with third countries is both legally viable and operationally achievable. So any civil disputes can be decided still through EU courts. I won't go to intellectual property. Security partnerships. The UK and the EU face a host of new growing security threats and challenges. These are unprecedented and do not recognise the borders of individual nations or discriminate between them. I thought I was going to be able to read all of this, but I don't think I can. The UK's vision for the future security relationship is underpinned by 5 key principles. The relationship should protect shared operational capabilities that keep people safe, respect the sovereignty of the UK and the autonomy of EU decision-making. Have the autonomy of EU decision-making. They don't have any autonomy over us. Have an institutional framework that delivers a practical and flexible partnership. Be dynamic. This is all rubbish. So this is all about, you know how she threatened security before the referendum, or after the referendum. Well, this is all relating to that, and criminals and terrorists operate across borders. The threat they present has grown in intensity and complexity and severity. Criminal networks are increasingly resilient and adaptable, exploiting technology and becoming involved in almost every type of crime. The EU and its member states have created a range of legal, practical and technical capabilities to combat these, and the UK therefore proposes an ambitious partnership with the EU that goes beyond existing precedents in this area, covering a mechanism for rapid and secure data exchange and practical measures to support cross-border cooperation. So we're still going to have that whole, there's a criminal in the EU, so we need to get him thing. I mean, there's a lot that's staying the same, if I'm honest. That's going to stay the same. And 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 that's going to... And these are going to stay the same. And that's going to stay the same. And foreign policy, defence and development is going to stay the same, pretty much. And that's going to stay the same. And that's going to stay the same. I mean, it's very, very... I mean, not just the language of it, but the whole thing is just very uninspiring. Yeah. So, I mean, I understand what Theresa May is trying to do. She's trying to ensure... I'll get off that because it's weird. She's trying to ensure the security of the UK economically, but in doing that, she's not really delivering Brexit. We're going to end up with everything. I mean, the only thing she wants to keep for definite is free movement of people. I think everything else is a bit blurred. She's blurred the lines on being inside or outside a customs arrangement. She's basically just put a new title on the customs union, called it free trade area, and a single market as well, free trade area, and a lot of other things are basically staying the same. It's copy and pasted into UK law. She's expecting the EU to be able to agree that we can get the best of both worlds and end free movement, but I know that the EU won't. They'll be like, no, hang on a minute. We want you either have free movement of people, or you don't have access to our single market, or we impose tariffs on your goods and stuff. So either you let people in, or tariffs are coming. But then she's tried to bribe them and say, hang on a minute, no, we'll support you on security. We'll spend whatever money you want on whatever state aid that you need, and we're not going to discriminate. We'll let everyone in from Eastern Europe. We're not going to discriminate. But she's not concentrating on what the UK actually wants. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that stream. It's probably very long. That's why I didn't do it as a proper video. I just did it as a stream because it's very long and unorganized. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, guys.